In this video, I would like to show you how I would quickly create the render model for a chair like this one. What's interesting here is that this chair actually has a solid core, and then it has upholstery and fabric over it, and it has a stitch seam. I measured most of the basic dimensions in. So the seat at the front is 45 centimeters wide. The depth is 41 centimeters, and the backrest is 43 centimeter high, and then there only is 33 centimeters wide. And the seat shell starts 44 centimeters off the ground. So if I want to transfer that into Blender, I would actually approach this one differently than, for example, in a solid modeler with dimension or sketch dimensions. I actually would create myself simply a flat shell and then bend the shell into the shape I need. So that means I, for example, start with a basic plane, 45 centimeters wide and 41 centimeters deep. So I'm in top view, so X is my width, so 44 centimeters, and my depth are 41 centimeters. Let's zoom in. Okay. The backrest is at the top 33 centimeters wide, and it is 43 centimeters tall. So I can Shift D, duplicate it, move it away. And then X is 33 centimeters and 43 centimeters high. Okay, now I would like to change the kind of like the layout or the positioning of those two shells, and I switch to edge snapping, move this one down, hold Control and snap it to this part, and then actually I can move everything 44 centimeters off the ground, so it has, for example, the right height. Okay, perfect. So why did I do this? Very simple. At this point now I have actually the basic proportions of my lower and upper length, and I can use that as a reference. And I also have my, for bending, for example, the backrest and the shell, and this is unflattened. So I'm creating a new plane, going to edit mode, scale this one down, and then I start, for example, sculpting kind of like the proportions I need. And you see here I S and X and Control, snap to those. And this, for example, would be the basic part for my seat shell. So this one I'm moving on to layer 2. And for example, let's give this one a subdivision surface modifier. Maybe let's say 2. Now this is very egg-like, and that's not really the shell or shape I need. So I go into edit mode, add maybe 2 loop cuts here. S and X, scale them apart. 2 loop cuts here. And now here I can't scale them, because if I would S and X scale them, you would see how this changes the shape. What I'm simply going to do here is I'm selecting the points of a loop cut and press GG, so 2 times, and I can slide this edge. There, perfect. And there you see now actually that I start getting kind of like a rectangular base with somewhat nice rounded edges. Now if you would like to have a little bit more control about those edge roundings, the lower part here, I know, for example, that actually it should be a 5 centimeter radius. So there, for example, I could create myself a small plane, 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters. And for example, I can see if now this line kind of like follows that proportion. So kind of like the midpoint to there midpoint to there. So this is actually pretty, not really pretty close. So this one I have to move to there and there. So here the fillet should stop. Here it should also stop. And there, for example, we can see that maybe this one, if I now turn this one on, there, maybe GG, let's see, maybe there, yeah, and for example, let me select all those points here, zip, zip, and zip, and there actually I S and X, scale those inwards, yeah, so that looks more like the one I have. Let's take a look at what I have on top. And there it is actually a little bit smaller. But maybe there I have to move those down a little bit. There. Okay. So those are not circular fillets. Those are kind of like blended curves in the original design. There you can see that. So that type of curvature I can rebuild that way. Simply by moving, for example, those loop cuts further apart or closer together. Okay, so this is basically step one for the basic shell. Now at this point maybe I can start thinking about how I could bend this one into the shell I need. But before I do this, I need to know that, for example, here I will need to have a loop cut to bend around. And maybe I press there with this loop cut selected, Control B, unbevel it, move my mouse wheel one time. So you see I'm basically unbeveling this line into two lines, and with moving my mouse wheel one time I have the midline back. So I'm basically having three lines with which I can work to create a fillet. And maybe I create a midline, press 0 and enter. So actually I can at one point use the points on this midline to, for example, vertically move these points up and down to create a little bit of kind of like a dipped down surface for your hip to rest in. Okay. So having this done now, maybe it's time to readjust maybe the position of the pivot point. So I select this first point, Shift S, cursor to selected, switch to object mode, press T, in under tools, set origin, and set my object center, so the pivot point to there. And then there I can go and say Shift A, create myself a Bezier curve. I rotate this curve a little bit, maybe -90. Going to edit mode, move this one down, AA, and set my pivot point to 3D cursor, SX and 0. So I actually lined up all these handles to be vertically to each other. I can turn those normals off. Maybe move this point closer to there and there. Okay, well, let's see if the orientation will be correct. So I can select this one there. For a moment, let's see, local and local. Okay, now U, curve, Bezier curve. Oh, perfect. So along the x-axis, and you see my spline has its x-axis local going this direction. See? And while I rotated it, now my seed shell flows along this curve. So now if I rotate this one, I would get a different result. Okay, so that is actually pretty nice and very helpful, because what I can do now is here, select these 2 points, enter edit and then leave edit mode, set origin to 3D cursor, and for example from a side now, I could rotate this one up and use this somewhat as a reference for my Bezier curve to understand where maybe I have to put all those control points and the handles, and I can rotate this one and there. And maybe I add another point in between, so I select all 2 points, W, subdivide. Nice thing in Blender, with the subdivide command, you can simply blend as well, and not blend, simply insert points. So switch pivot point to 3D cursor as 0 and Z. Okay, so you see what I did. And normal. Yeah, can do it maybe this way. Let's see. I would like to change the resolution for the spline a little bit. So, and maybe here actually I'm switching this back to this, and then there, W, and then there I'm going to insert simply another spline point or fit point. So I have a little bit more locally control over my edge rounding, and then I can push those handles nicely out, for example, to have a much better transition. See, when I make this one really small and move this one up, you see how flattened this curve gets. So there I can now nicely sculpt that shape and transition I'm looking for. Okay, and then let's go back. Let's take a look with our shell how this looks like. Not too bad. Now I think the front part, for example, slightly dips down. That means I have to use my spline. Go into edit mode, move this one back and there. And here in between I'm going to insert another point, maybe to there, and then this first point actually I'm going to move down and then rotate maybe up. Hold on, now there, there, rotate -90, there, move this one down, and then maybe this point scale, and move this one over, and there you see now I'm actually bending that mesh into the shell I need. And then radius roughly takes place over 5 centimeters, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so a little bit too small. So here let's put this one back and maybe there. Let's leave it. Let's take a look at 3D, and that feels a little bit better. Now let's take a look at the back, because this one currently is very straight, and actually that's slightly arced itself. So I can do maybe the following. Let's pull this handle down and then push this one in and see if this might be enough. So you see I'm not actually adjusting this line, because this one I would like maybe my handle to be parallel to the curve and have this nice slight arc in there, or actually push this one over. Yeah. Or by adjusting the handle length and the radius or the rotation. You can see how I'm sculpting basically the backrest to give it a little bit of lumbar support. Yeah, maybe like this. Okay, so, and at this point, for example, now we can maybe take a look at, so how can we actually bend the shell? Because currently the shell is pretty flat. Now, with this spline, we basically define the flow or how I bend this surface, but then the shell itself I can also bend. So that's the reason why I had all these points added. So I can actually turn on, for example, the editing features. So being in real time applied. So you see now this is flat, the original mesh, or projected onto the shell. And I have to move my Y key up and down. So see if I move the Y key, in reality I'm just pushing these points down. And you see that actually starts arcing everything already nicely. So maybe here the same. So now you see there's a slight arc, and then from the front it's straight. And can, for example, see where all these points are. So maybe in between here, if I want to. No, maybe I do it this way. And here, those two. There. Okay. And then in addition, of course, I have to do the same with those points there. So I get a better edge-to-edge transition. I'm going to turn everything off because now what I would like to do is actually make sure that the way how I'm bending these parts is nice and even. Actually, I forgot those points there, so zip, zip. Bend them all down a little bit. Let's take a look from the side. Okay, and maybe, you know what I'm going to do? I'm starting a small slight transition. So progressively they get flatter. So let's take a look. Oh, that's pretty nice. Okay, so currently this is pretty flat. So let's give it a thickness. I measure that should be roughly 3 centimeters. And maybe, let's see, what direction? Oh, maybe 2 centimeters. Let's do that one first. Okay. So you see I moved everything up. So first solidify. Let's explain the directions again. So flat, solidify, then I smooth it out, and then I bend the whole piece. So pretty nice actually. Let's shade smooth. And let's take a look at how, for example, our edge roundings look like. And this is all actually pretty fine. So this might now be a nice shell actually. For example, being a start point for an upholstered shell. Let's maybe set this one to 3 centimeters, 2.5 centimeters. Okay, that's not too shabby. So the seat has a small seam, roughly 5 millimeters, kind of like a circular cross section. That one's pretty easy to build. So I select my object, Shift T, Escape, M and 3, put it onto layer 3. So I keep my original model intact. And then here I apply my solidify modifier, because currently I just have a flat shell. Now I have a three-dimensional object. And turn on my edge length. And I make a loop cut, maybe at the lower area. Another loop cut, kind of like 5 millimeters away, kind of like this. And then I'm going to select all those ring faces. And with all these faces selected, what I'm going to do is simply extrude another kind of like, yeah, pipe out of this. So I press spacebar and type in solidify. Press T, go to thickness, and then I can slide this one and pay attention to that maybe the proportion will be the same. So that this actually is going to be kind of like 5 millimeters. So it's out too much a little bit. So there I have 5 millimeters. Okay. But there are some problems I have. This might not necessarily be visible in the first moment, so I'm selecting all those faces here and press H, and you can see that they're actually, the original face is still there. Those I would like to remove, and I think I can do this with select manifold. Let's see. I thought actually that might have been here. Or maybe they moved it to somewhere else. Okay, never mind. So I have to select all those faces, as you can see, because when I cut them open, so I remove actually those faces, you see that you can actually look into the original, not original, you can look into kind of like that geometry I pulled out. So let's paint those and height. And I have my key shortcuts changed, so currently my shortcut for selecting the loop cuts doesn't work, and you of course can do this by pressing Alt and clicking on an edge horizontally or vertically, and then that selects the loop cut. There, perfect. Okay, I have to change the faces, the normals are flipped. So I go to V and recalculate, and let's take a look. And there you see now, yeah, all work. So the piece pulled out, and it doesn't look too bad. That's pretty nice. Okay, but I mentioned before this is actually circular cross section, and currently this rather looks like extruded like this. So I have to modify my design a little bit. So what I'm going to do is the following. I'm going to maybe Control R, add another loop cut. There, Control R, add another loop cut there, move them in, and then select, for example, this loop cut. And for example, G and Z, move it up. There you see how I'm pinching it. There and there, select loop, side view, G and Z, move this one down. And let's take a look. So that actually seemed to have worked a little bit better. And maybe that was a little bit too much. So, oh, what did I do? Oh. Okay, so I guess what I have to do now is a little bit of fine-tuning. So I guess what I need to do is simply the following. Here I have to create a loop cut at the center. So this loop cut, maybe like I did before, I move down a little bit. This loop cut, I move up a little bit, and then the previous loop cut, select loop GG, bring in a little bit, and then G and Z move it down. And the same here, select GG. So you see GG actually slides the rings, or I grow or expand it, G and Z, move it up. So I'm giving you kind of like the illusion of the fabric being pinched a little bit. Okay, and then actually at this point I'm going to apply the view, so I can click and then say select loop GG and try to see maybe if there are some other ways to modify this a little bit. To make this whole thing look more like the shape I have on my chair. And G and Z, move it up. Yeah, so there it starts creasing better. And maybe this one I select, because it's kind of more like an X shape. And if I press Ctrl B, and with a loop cut, maybe I can round this a little bit more. Or maybe not. Or maybe just with two. Yeah. Okay. Let's take a look at what we have down here. Yep. That looks actually pretty good. So there is another shell, kind of like with a seam modeled along it. So what you can see here is now actually my revised model. I adjusted my shell a little bit and played with the bend curve, made this one more flatter, which is actually more the way how the actual chair is. And then I added my legs. And the legs are actually pretty much modeled in a similar way than, for example, my my shell. So let me show you actually how I did this. So all this, I move on to this layer. So 3D cursor, 4.3 centimeters, X, Y, and Z 0. And I'm creating a small circle, maybe 6 vertices, 1 centimeter radius. So the pipe or the circle has kind of like a 2 centimeter diameter. And where did it go to? Whoops, that's not the correct way. 0 there. Should be at the center. And in edit mode, I simply rotate this cross section. And the whole idea is basically that, for example, I have a pipe, similar like this. So linear section, and then something for bending. So I'm going to create actually here now a NURBS curve, and in Blender we can actually, if I go to the top view, go into edit mode, you see the NURBS curve. But you see actually that unlike Alias currently it does not start and end actually at the endpoints. I can turn this one on by simply going to the curve option and say endpoint. I don't really want to see those handles or normals actually. And I'm going to switch to 3D cursor because now those 2 vertices here, I would like to S, Y, and 0 in my view scale down. And then this point I move over to there, and this point as X and 0, I scale to the 3D cursor. I move this one to there, move this one over, and this one I move down. So, see there now, I have kind of like another NURBS curve. So you see I can use a spline for the shell, or a NURBS curve, and then here now I go ahead and say deform. So I take my straight pipe and which one is it? NURBS curve. There, bend it along it. Okay, obviously the proportions aren't right. So let's move this one inwards to there and there, and maybe here in between. Let's subdivide it with W, move maybe these points a little bit closer together, and let's take a look. So there you see that the pipe bends, but because I don't really have many polygons or subdivisions, there's not much geometry this deformer can actually perfectly deform. Also, forgot to say this, maybe this one set to something like 64. And what this one does is it's kind of like a subdivision or accuracy for the pipe. Now everything I'm doing here right now is not very precise in terms of engineering. I'm simply building quickly a pipe which is easier to manage, to model, and also very good for rendering. So, for example, this pipe now I can subdivide. And maybe I put the subdivision above the curve, so I make my geometry more dense, so I have more points to bend. But you start seeing when I increase the view level, the mesh gets unnecessarily complex. And there's a little trick what we can do here. So first, let's shade this one smooth, go into edit mode, and also here, for example, I can turn this one on and turn this one on, so I see where these control points, for example, land. So this one, for example, I push back. Yeah, so this is straight. So for example, here in between, you see actually where my mouse is, 0 there. Let's turn this one off. See, that's in between here. So maybe let's take a look. Actually, that's actually already pretty good. With a 3, that looks nice and smooth, but that's maybe still too many subdivisions. So instead of 3 cuts, maybe I make more cuts. Enter. Let's take a look. Yeah. So you see, instead of making everything unnecessarily heavy, I simply add geometry where needed, specifically at the bend area. And then it can still, with additional loop cuts, for example, help that geometry. And what's really nice about this piping is you see I work on basically a long piece, and then I simply, for my rendering, bend it into the shape I need, and I can do some interesting tricks here. So right now, for example, I go to another 3D view here, and main reason for that is, so for example, I can see how this part looks like while, for example, working on this area here, and I extrude it, went to boundary box, scale it down, maybe move this one over there. And maybe, let's see, maybe these points actually I move inwards a little bit. Whoops, forgot this point there. Seriously, that doesn't look too bad. So that's pretty much the way how I build everything. And the nice aspect of this design process is simply when I rotate this one maybe to 45 degrees, okay, and go to local, because this, for example, is not correct yet. So Alt D, so I make a clone R 90 degrees, Alt D R 90, Alt D 90, and then first I can actually select this NURBS curve. You see I'm inside local mode, and I simply move all these vertices along the local direction, and that shows us now our pipe is too short. I select one of those geometry parts, and then along local space simply extend it, leave edit mode. Of course I have to select all there, zip, and now all legs are updated. Obviously this area is wrong, but again, even for concept modeling this is totally sufficient, and for rendering anyway, because a lot of the way how the pipes are bent and squeezed, they basically have the tools for it. They don't cast a pipe that shape, so they simply work with straight pipes. But we just have then to figure out how to bend them, where to compress them. For example, here I will have one pipe compressed from one side, here the pipe compressed from the other side. So for example, I have half the width of each pipe or diameter, so they perfectly overlay and don't intersect. So that's pretty much what I did to build those legs. And then just in addition I added some gliders just for the sake of having those nice finished parts. And yeah, so that's for example a very quick way how you could create a render model for something which has pipe legs and has an upholstered body. Now I showed before actually that you can use this displacement modifier to add a little bit of irregularity, for example over the surface. For example, this should be some sort of let's say fabric, and I'm going to simply Shift D, copy this one and move this onto another layer, because what we can do also in addition to add a little bit more of variation, I am for example selecting those points here, and for example move those down here, select these points and maybe move them up, maybe here the whole point down. Not really enough, so maybe here I add a loop cut, so I have a little bit more of material I actually could play with. So I'm starting to add a little bit of irregularities, simply so that everything doesn't look perfectly the same. Maybe here we make this one a little bit thicker, of course not too much. Maybe here this will compress a little bit more, so those points, no, in this case actually I rather like to do it this way, so maybe here I push those in. Whoops. Let's see. And then you start slowly maybe seeing that there are some variations. So here maybe this one up a little bit, this one a little bit down more. Yeah, I mean the more subdivisions, for example, I would give, the more geometry points I would have to adjust and to play with the whole design. So you have to figure out kind of like a good balance between not making your piece too complicated, adding too much. And the last really interesting part, for example, would be this one. I'm going to remove my subdivision and I'm going to add a multi-res. Now the multi-res, if we click on subdivide, is quite interesting because it gives us pretty much the same tool, kind of like subdivision, with one difference. Now I can go into the sculpt mode and, for example, press T, maybe push. Do I have symmetry on? Let's see, symmetry, no symmetry, okay. I'm just doing some things here. Okay, normal mode. Let's take a look. And then you see actually I sculpted the surface. So this actually might be a nicer way to add a little bit of variation to it. So let's undo everything what I did. Let's go back and, for example, delete this multi-res, and you see then I'm back to my low polygon model. So what this multi-res is basically doing, kind of like you can paint, let's say, invisible three-dimensional maps, and those then help you to deform the geometry a little bit. So I'm making my brush really big, and the strength is way too much, so maybe something like this. I think this is maybe too low. There, something starts to happen. Okay, I still had the symmetry turned on. And we can also maybe take a look at grab. How does grab work? Ooh, interesting. So maybe really big. So really gentle. Don't do this too much. So I'm just adding a little bit of irregularity to that stuff. Okay, now if we go back to object mode, there you can see now how maybe I totally destroyed this model. But you can actually see the effect pretty well. The nice thing is, again, if maybe, let's see, delete higher. Yeah, didn't really do it. Okay, so delete this one and add another multi-res, move it back up, zip zip, and maybe just preview 2. Let's see how this one would work. The thing is, the more you subdivide, the more geometry points you have, and the less points, for example, you see now, the more drastic maybe my deformations or sculpting effects will work. And if I make this brush really small and then, for example, see, then go more into the detail, I can bring in some irregularity just onto the stitching area. And basically I only can move where I see those lines. And I can still actually then subdivide one more, so that smoothes everything out. And I can go back to like preview, but I can go back to sculpt just only to this level, so I have a lower density to work with. And then for previewing, there we can see what the end result then will be. And if we're done, again, go back to the object mode, leave the sculpt mode, and now you see that some of those lines are not so perfectly even anymore. And it's more the way how this would be in real life. Now if we would like to bring this one then into Blender, there are multiple ways how we can do this. So for example, this shell, I would actually call it maybe shell sculpted, and maybe this shell I would call shell normal. And for example, all those, now I actually would like to add to a group together with those two here. So I select all together, add to group, and hold on, before I do this, I do something else. So Shift A, and I'm going to create a big empty. Now this empty, setting onto the ground plane, and maybe let's adjust the size, maybe 50 centimeters. Okay, AA, and I make sure that everything is selected, and then again add to group, and maybe this one I call seed. So my empty got selected to the group, but not this other stuff. So let's go this way, group, add selected to active group, which should be the seed. And now you see everything is highlighted green, so which means these objects are part of a group. Now you might ask yourself, well, why did I create this empty? So first thing first, and Control P, parent the shells to the empty. So when I move the empty, you see the shells move. There's also somewhere that spline. Where's the spline? Oh, the spline is here. So this actually has to be added to the group as well. Add selected to active group. Oops. Okay. Add to group. Wait. Oh, that's the reason I had group typed in. So normally when you have different groups and you select an object and go to add group, there, delete this one. There you see now, there's my group for the seed. So that's what I wanted to have. Also the spline parent to this empty. And then I also have all those parts here. Now, actually, you see this leg, the pipe is a parent to the spline and the glider. So what I do to chain this correctly, all those parents will become children to this empty, and Control P, parent them to the empty. So when I click the empty and move it, you see everything moves with it. So the whole point behind this is simply, now I'm going to rearrange my design a little bit. This one I'm going maybe to move onto this layer there, move to layer 1, move to layer 2, those legs maybe move to layer 3, move to layer 3, was that? Center spline, layer 3. So you see, this way I have everything, including this shell or this shell. And hold on, there was one mystery object. So this orange one here. Oh yeah, you go to layer 10. I keep this one for storage. So this way I can easily, for example, flip between different variations. And now you might ask yourself, well, why did I do all these groups, etc.? The main reason is I can import or append actually this group. This will bring in everything, including those two design shells I made. And then, for example, with just selecting the empty and moving it around, you see I can update and reposition my whole object, rotate it. So instead of selecting multiple objects, I just have one target object. And interestingly, there seems to be a refresh bug. Just go into edit mode and edit and exit edit mode, and then everything snaps back into its place. So that's, for example, how I then create not only a render model, but also prepare a render asset, so I can easily transfer that into different scenes. So let me save this one, and let's open the table so you can see what the whole point is. So maybe on this layer now I go to File, Append. Here's my seed group, and wait, I'm in object. I want to go to group. There, seed, append this group, and there you see now it brought everything over. And then I can simply select this empty, move it around, and then reposition everything. So that's pretty nice. That's the whole idea behind then how to quickly create not only geometry but also make them easy to be moved around all at the same time.